Hello, I'm the Pink Phantom, and this is my podcast. Join me as I delve into the world of games and gaming, and especially old school RPGs. Together, let's voyage into the astral realm and check out my Phantom Thoughts. Before we get into, the content portion of the podcast, I want to talk for a minute about Jason Connerly of the Nerds RPG Variety Cast. You're going to hear from him in the call-in segment right after this, and you've heard him, if you've been listening to my show for any period of time, you've heard him in the call-in segments of most of them, almost all of them, in fact. Jason is the host of the Nerds RPG Variety Cast, and there will be a link to that. He has decided to wind that podcast down after over 620 shows. Well, 620 numbered shows. I think he's also had some shows that didn't necessarily fall into a normal podcast category where he didn't bother numbering them. So he could be up close to 650. But he's always been more than that. And Jason, he is someone that is he's kind of a glue of a group of us that are podcasters. That's the way I view him anyway, because he calls into all our shows. And this group of podcasters originally organized before I ever started podcasting over an app called Anchor. And the thing about this app was that in addition to being able to listen to podcasts on it and favorite podcasts, the two key features of it, if you ask the people about it that started podcasting on it, were, number one, you could do an entire podcast from your phone. You could make segments, and you could organize them, and you could put them together all in the app on your phone. You never had to go pull out a mouse and keyboard, a laptop or desktop or anything like that in order to organize your podcast. You could organize it and put it together. You could record your segments in any order you wanted, put them together how you wanted, and publish them straight through the app. Do it all from your phone. And the other feature of it was podcasts that you had favorited, that you knew about. You could go to their page essentially on the app, and there was a button you could press to leave them a message. Now, you could do that on the computer too. That was available there too. But it was something where you're listening to a podcast, you're on the go, you want to respond, encouragement, counter argument, whatever. You go to that, stay in the app, go to that podcast, push that button, leave a message. And there was a whole group of people who sort of organized around that functionality of that app and started creating podcasts and called into each other's show. We were always referred to it as call-ins. And that was the group that when I started listening to RPG podcasts, I got drawn into. And it was sort of an organic process. I don't remember exactly whose podcast I listened to first, but there would be call-ins, and they would say, hey, that's so-and-so from this show. And so I'd look up that show. And it just snowballed from there, eventually to the point where I started calling in and eventually felt the need to start my own podcast. And and Anchor has since been bought by Spotify, and some of the functionality has been slowly removed, and now they're going to sunset everything by the summer. So it's kind of the end of an era. And in a way, it's kind of fitting that Jason is ending his podcast now right before that happens, because to me, Jason and what he's meant to this community, with the way he's encouraging, the way he's inclusive, the way he puts out interesting and thought-provoking podcasts for people to respond to, and most importantly, maybe the way he responds to podcasts. He does 1 or 2 or 3 podcasts worth of information and topics and reaction, just calling into other people's podcasts during the week. And that's a great thing about Jason. And he's very encouraging, and he's very positive, and he's very interested in different viewpoints in a way that doesn't become argumentative or, in any way negative. He's just but also he's not just yes all the time. He'll have a difference of opinion with you if he has a different idea. And so, if the Anchor app was the bones on which this group of podcasters, the Anchorverse, the Anchorsphere, whatever you want to call it, was built around. Jason was a lot of the connective tissue. He really is uh, a big deal in this community, I think, and I believe others will agree if you ask them what he has meant to their podcast personally and to this group in particular. So I just want to take this moment to kind of point out that the podcast is ending, but he's got over 600 episodes. If you haven't heard, he covers not just gaming and games. He does a lot of episodes about movies. He does things about different actors and directors and things. So it is the Nerds Variety Podcast. He covers a lot of topics there, things that are interesting to him, and you always hear his dogs in the background, and that's always really cool. And he's going to continue on, I know, because he will continue to call in. I'm sure there will be some podcast that he's a guest host on. He's a guy that frequently invited people to collaborate with him on his podcast, or he collaborated with others. He was part of a collaborative podcast called Cerebrivore a couple of years ago that a group of the anchorites hosted together in different groups on and off over the course of a year or so. And so he's going to be around. He's got a blog he's going to operate out of. He's explained that one of the reasons he's doing this is because he can blog and be with his family. If you're podcasting, you got to kind of be by yourself or just with whoever you're podcasting with. But he can be with his family. He can be with his dogs. And so, Jason, I just want to say I'm going to be following your blog. I look forward to your input on my podcast and other podcasts as you see fit to do so. And I hope you enjoy the extra time you're able to create with your family, both fur and human. So having said all that, let's get to the calls, and we're going to start with Jason.
Hey, Jason here. So really great feedback on the rules question. I'm glad we got that. Hopefully we get some more. Yeah, no, it's interesting. Cognitive load was brought up, and when we look at cognitive load, now it's one thing if you're active into something and a master of something, or at least learned somebody in something like Anthony's martial arts, then this kind of goes out. But the rule of thumb for cognitive load for somebody that doesn't have deep training in something is they can generally remember three things, right? So like when you think of, like, say, self-defense, like you're generally going to remember three counters or three moves, and that's about it, right? So three is a kind of a magic number as far as things the average person can learn quickly and retain pretty well. So I wonder how that plays in with RPGs and rule sets. Now, I know not everybody is a fan of universal mechanic in games. I know our friend Daniel over Bandits Keep isn't a fan of universal mechanics. I can take or leave them. But if you have more than three main mechanics in a game, potentially you could overwhelm new players to some degree, if that cognitive load theory is correct. So I wonder, how that kind of plays in. I know that's a sidebar kind of thing, but when Lee mentioned cognitive load, I kind of thought about that. So anyway, great discussion, and I look forward to it continuing, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care.
Thank you, Jason. Years ago, when I used to listen to a lot of board game podcasts before I started listening to RPG podcasts, one of the things that was often a topic in a lot of those podcasts was how to teach board games, particularly the more complex board games, or the board games that had a lot of interactions where just knowing the steps didn't necessarily get you the entire aspect of the game, and which games did it well and how they did it. And, talking about cognitive load, brings to mind that same thing, because you're basically that's basically what you're talking about, the same thing, how to teach people the game. And it reminds me of way back in the day, the old Avalon Hill board game Civilization, which could take a long time to play and could be very complex in its interaction because you could have up to 7 players. But it started out very simply. And the basic steps that you went through, the different phases of the game, were on a card that you used for other purposes as well, for tracking things. So every player had one. But at the beginning of the game, you were only going to go through the first 3 or 4 steps, I think, because until you had built out on the board your civilization and you had more access to more resources, there was only so much you could do. So the game just naturally progressed in a way that was easy to teach because you could set it down in front of everybody, show them the basics of what their cards and counters represented. And, here's where you can start. You can pick your starting spots from here. And then you could go through those first 3 or 4 turns, and you're not doing a lot of activity. They go really quick. And it's not until you get to the later aspects of the game where you're doing a lot of negotiating with other players that the game could expand and take the time that it was so famous for taking up. But, having something like that could reduce that cognitive load because you're only teaching those initial concepts. And in RPGs, there's a natural ability to do that if you wanted to because, you're playing with levels of the character, and there's only so much the character can do at first level, at second level. But I do think with the older style play, there is a higher kind of barrier of entry cognitive load because a lot of those games encourage just kind of free thinking out of the box. Put yourself in that space where your character is, or even in your character's mind, depending on how much immersion you're going for in your game, and decide what you want to do. And it's about asking questions and interacting. So there's a lot of interaction, there's a lot of thinking, there's a lot of analyzing going up front. So that could potentially make it more difficult than a game where you have more of a, for lack of a better term, programmed approach, where your answer is on the character sheet, because that's really kind of the big bugaboo, right, that separates the OSR style, the old school game style, from newer styles is the answer on your character sheet, or is it something that you have to try to come up with out of your own mind? But yeah, I do think that the cognitive load idea is something you can assuage with how you roll out the rules, whether it's at your table or by the company, designed into the system. And Daniel actually touches more on that in one of his calls coming up next. So let's take a listen to that.
Hey, Pink Phantom. Daniel from Minutes keep calling in. Sorry I haven't called it on the last few episodes. Been a bit under the weather. But anyways, I was listening to... First of all, I want to respond to Jason's call about the starter sets. This is a really interesting subject. I hope we get more calls because I'm very curious with people with maybe more experience than me have in these things. So my experience with starter sets has been a couple of different versions. So I'm not going to talk about 80s TSR yet. Maybe I'll add that at the end. But in modern times, the things that I've seen are a good example would be DCC, right? DCC, Dungeon Crawl Classics, Goodman Games, has a starter magazine, if you will. I'm not sure what we call it. Quick Start Guide, I think is what they call it. And the Quick Start Guide is listed as $5, though you can often get it for free at cons. If you're part of the road crew, they send you some to hand out to players. And in this Quick Start, you've got the basic rules of the game. I don't know. I'm not in my home, so I can't look. I don't think there's character creation, though, but it has at least some of the basic rules of the game. Maybe some basic character creation. And like some of the spells. Obviously, DCC has a lot of spells. And then it has an adventure, or maybe even 2 adventures. And what's nice about this is for $5, assuming you're going to pay for it, obviously you need to buy dice or use some kind of online roller, but for $5 you could sit down and play DCC. You could see if you like the system, you can try it out, and if you do, then you go and buy the hardback book, or there's a softback book too, which range anywhere. I've seen the softbacks as cheap as $10, but I think the standard price is $25 or $50. So this allows us to... And of course, DCC, for people who don't know, the whole game is in one book. So you just need the one book. This $5, though, allows us to have a night of fun with our friends. We may never play DCC again. I think for the $5, it's worth it. Now, another example would be Modifius 2D20. I bought their Quick Start. And I want to say that was like $7.99 or $10.99 or $9.99, something like that. It was about $10. And it was a similar thing. It had an adventure. It had some basic rules, and I believe that one had pre-gens. I'm not sure if it had character creation in it. And again, for $10, I sat around the table with 4, maybe 5 of my friends, and played a game of 2D20. And then if I had wanted to, which I didn't think it really clicked with our group, so I didn't, I could have then spent the $50 or $60 or whatever it costs for the beautiful Conan book. Of course, I wish I had bought it now because they don't make it anymore and it's probably a collector's item. But anyways, and again, I could list off several games like this where I've gotten the quick starts. Mostly when I was going to Gen Con, I'd go to all the various tables. And like I said, anywhere from $5 to $10, a lot of these companies sell these quick starts. Now, as Jason mentioned, whatever you're getting in the quick start is not unique, except for the adventure maybe. What's in the quick start is generally an adventure, right, and some basic rules, which means that aside from the adventure, everything else that's in the quick start you get in the regular rules. So is that a money grab? I mean, I'm not sure. I think it's a way to tempt people. It's like a free sample. Well, not free, but it's like a sample at the supermarket, right? Or buying a smaller, you can buy an individual ice cream, right, versus buying a gallon, right? If you buy the gallon of ice cream, you certainly get more value for your money, but it costs more, right? So I don't really have ice cream on the mind. I think that's one purpose these quick starts can serve. I think if they are simply a cut down version of the game, and then they kind of cut you off, then maybe they're not as valuable. And again, unless they're in a box set form or something like as Jason mentioned. So jumping over to D&D, modern D&D, the starter box, at least the one with Fendelver in it, gives you an adventure. It gives you some basic rules of play, and it gives you pre-gens. No rules for creating a character. So in Fendelver, as an adventure, I haven't played it, but many people like it. It seems to me, looking at it, that you're looking at multiple nights of play. So this box set, I think, was $20 when it came out. I got mine for like $7 when, like around the holidays, they usually went on sale. And you got dice with it. You got, again, the adventure. You got the pre-gens, which are on like separate sheets, like handouts. I don't know. It's got a lot of replayability. The rules are really written. I kind of like the way that box set's set up, but I'm not going to get too much into that. And the basic rules of D&D were, and I believe still are, free online. So assuming you have internet access, with that box set, you could continue to play on. So now you're looking at $20 and you kind of could consider to play on, or $50 retail for the player's handbook with no adventure. So I think that if you look at it like that, if you're not sure if you love D&D or that you're going to want to play D&D or you just want to dip your toe into it, I feel like the starter set is still probably worthwhile. For the $20, you're going to keep the dice for sure. The adventure will give you multiple nights of fun. But yes, you will have to buy because, the free rules online, we're just going to not consider those. You'll still have to buy something. But now rolling all the ways back to TSR era, right? So BX, Holmes Basic, BECME, at least we'll say the basic box, the starter box. That box set, I can't remember what it costs and what the equivalent would be, but that box set on all three cases, it comes with, granted only the third level, but it comes with all the rules that you need to play the game. You could play a game with just the basic box for a long time. You have, again, to get to third level, you're probably looking at 10 to 12 adventures. You've got to keep on the Borderlands or one of those adventures to start with. And I think that in that case, and of course, AD&D was different, so it's not like you're rebuying the exact same rules. But, let's just say we are. I think in that case, you're kind of good. I think those sets were really nice because they gave you everything. But I feel like equivalency-wise, they were probably closer to like half the price of, let's say, a hardback. So I don't know. Is one better than the other? I would prefer to have a complete game in a box, I guess. But even with the basic set, I think a lot of us went off and bought the 3 core books of AD&D. So it's not like those were, just used. Nowadays everybody's playing BX, or a lot of people play BX. I play it, but I think a lot of people got the basic box, maybe basic and expert, and then learned D&D and then moved on. Was the value of those boxes in learning? And do these other starter sets actually teach you how to play the game? That would be the question I'd have. So if you were going to go to the movies, or if you were going to go out for dinner, or if you were going to go to a museum, is the price of admission, the $5, the $10, the $25 worth it for 1 or 2 nights of fun with your friends? To me, that's how I value something like a box set or a starter set. Anyways, I think it's cool. I actually really like the idea of BECME. on some level, I kind of think they went too far with too many boxes. But, because if you look at BX, it was supposed to be 3 boxes total. I think that would have been very good. I think that 5 boxes probably was a bit much. But then again, there was a lot of stuff in it, right? So I guess it was worth it. But first, for those people that did Beckme. But as we see, at least as people play, these days, the BX system is one of the most cloned because most people aren't playing beyond 10, 12, 14 levels. So really, for your money's worth, Basic and Expert, now I'm going sideways, is basically a complete system and not really a starter box if you want to think of it that way. And Holmes Basic was not, obviously, because it only had the basic. And Beckme is, of course, also a very complete system. And I'm guessing that it would be easy enough just to play Beckme with just the basic and expert the same ways. Anyways, that's an incredibly long message, but I thought it was a super interesting subject. I hope that's my analysis. I hope more people call in about this, and I'll talk to you soon. Hey, Bang Fandom, Daniel from Bandit's Keep. I'll try to keep this one a little shorter. You're talking about rules, like how important is any one particular rule. I think it's fascinating, and I agree with what you're saying here. I think based on everything I understand, what I read between the lines, and what I've seen, that in the early days of the hobby, just like now really, a lot of people, including the creators of the game, play the game differently. And they expand and they try things, they do different things. So how important is it to get one exact rule right from an older game? I guess it depends on, from my point of view, it depends on your reasoning. I think that if the reason is because you feel like you're not playing correctly unless you're doing it exactly the way they did it, I think that might be a bit of a fool's errand because, as you said, I think they played a lot of different ways. And Chainmail in particular, which is what I think you're referring to here, it very specifically says to make changes and play the game as you like. I mean, just like D&D does. Interestingly enough, that's a real common thing, a thread running through at least TSR, because the Buck Rogers board game I picked up that I ran at GaryCon recently also says that in the rules. It says, here's the board game, here's the rules, here's some optional rules, but you know what? Make up your own rules, play it your own way, use what you want. And I think that's a great attitude that TSR had, and maybe WotC carries it over as well. But I think that is the core of what we're doing here. Now, for me, I like to look at the rules and examine them because oftentimes it'll open up something exciting because I run OD&D now, I've run my campaign now for a while, and I've obviously have my own hack of it, and I'll still pick up the books and reread certain paragraphs and go, oh, hold on, is there something else here that is a different interpretation that I could interpret differently, that might have been played differently? And sometimes that's fun to explore. Not because I want to look at it and go, oh no, I've been playing terribly and wrong, because that's not what they meant, but rather, hey, this could open up a new option for me. So I think we have to be careful, or else we'll stress ourselves out if we are not more open-minded about the rules. Because I think that in a lot of cases, especially in older rule sets, the rules were, at least I will say, intentionally left open-ended because they knew people were going to make changes. So is any particular rule like super important? Maybe in games where there's a core mechanic, you want to make sure that you get that correct. Because if the core mechanic is roll a d20 against a target number, but you treat it like Black Hack where you're rolling low versus treating it like 5e where you have to roll high, or if you do the opposite, then that might really throw off the whole system, right? You'd be like, wow, that, DC 18 check to sneak past the guard was really easy. Well, yeah, that's because you were supposed to be rolling 18 or better, not 18 or under. So, yeah, I think in those cases that might be important. But when you're talking about little like specifics of rules or exactly how they're executed, how many shots does an archer get, per segment if somebody's charging them down a dark corridor where the ceilings are 12 foot high, if you don't get that exactly right, I don't think that's going to change your game too much. Anyways, great content as always. I really enjoyed the Dragon Slayer part of it. I love that kind of mystery where they kind of, spoiler, I guess people didn't watch it, where the amulet just kind of acted on the wishes of the possessor. Very, very cool. I liked it a lot. Talk to you soon.
Thank you, Daniel, for the calls. You did cover a lot of territory, but I thought it was all very, very interesting, very, very, putting a lot of ideas out there. I think the idea of box set or tiered play, starter sets, quick starts, I think that is a good point. That sort of the the flip of Jason's argument that a lot of times starter sets or quick starts are cash grabs because you're going to end up having to buy the whole game anyway. The flip side of that is you have a relatively low cost of entry to decide if you want to engage with this game or if this game engages with you or with your group. And I think you're really hitting the nail on the head with what to provide in that starter set. Are you turning over all of the basic rule sets the way that D&D does with its SRD, where you can get the rules online for free? The basic rules anyway, and some of the resources that go with that, things like spells and feats and stuff. A fair selection of those to start off with. And I think it's interesting because, for RPGs, particularly some of the ones that are more established like D&D, if you're trying to figure out what to include in a quick start or starter set, you kind of have a divided attention with that because if your established game, the people who are going to buy your game are not the same when you put out a new game or a new edition. Some of them are going to be new to the hobby, and you need to provide a certain amount of support to them in that starter set. But some of them are going to be more established gamers, and maybe you decide as a company that okay, the full game is going to be for established gamers. If you're already an established RPG group or an established RPG player or dungeon master, then the starter set or the quick start is not going to give you much other than maybe a flavor of the mechanics. But everything else, the stuff that a more veteran group of players would need to know is not going to be touched upon until you get the full game, you get the full book or books. However you're organizing your game. Whereas with somebody that's new to RPGs, that's new to the hobby, there's some very basic ideas and concepts that you need to roll out to them, if not as part of the hobby of a whole for your specific game, that the people who have played RPGs that have experience are not going to need. So in that circumstance, if you're going to divide it where the more established players need they need the whole book, they need to buy the whole game to start with. If you're not going to provide it in something like an SRD that's available for free or cheap, then for that situation, for those guys, if they buy the starter set, then that is kind of a cash grab situation where they're buying a starter set that they're not going to get that much use out of. But again, on the flip side of that, if you are really putting the mechanical part that is the game all the way up to, maybe up to a few levels where all you're missing is, spells and feats and skills and stuff for the upper levels, then an established gamer group could probably take that quick start, learn those mechanics, decide they like it, and just expand upon it themselves, because that's part of the nature of RPGs, right? Is the veteran players, the people who stick around the hobby, a lot of them, they start adjusting the game to suit their needs at their table. And it's funny when you look at it, AD&D, and maybe to a certain extent OD&D, I'm not as familiar with OD&D, but just looking through the rules, it looks like it's the same. They only give you really a lot of specifics for up to name level. And once you get to name level in AD&D, it says it just takes this many additional experience points to get to the next level, but there's not additional levels of spells to get beyond 9th. There's not additional skills or powers or options that you get if you're a fighter or a cleric or magic user or a thief, other than maybe there's a basic set of skills that goes up a percentage every level. I think the thief is like that. I'm not sure. I haven't looked at the upper levels of thief in a while. But specific rules, design rules, center rules really function on those first 9, 10, 11 levels, which, like you were saying in your call, you can basically play the whole game with basic expert or the basic and expert box sets of BECMI, because a lot of people don't get to that upper level of play in AD&D and OD&D. The upper level of play is a lot often left to how the game has developed at the table by the players and the DM of that specific group. There's not what 3rd edition on of D&D does, where they give you every level. Here's what you get at 14th level, 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th, or in the case of 4th edition, all the way up to 30th. Moving on to what you said about the rules and how important the individual rules are, I do see the value in using the original rules, number one, to start with. Play the game by the rules to start with before you start tinkering, which is something I, of course, do not do because I started tinkering my AD&D campaign almost immediately. But I have played some in the distant past, so maybe I get a pass for that. and of course, there's no rule against not tinkering from the beginning. You want to adjust it from the beginning. That's your nature, so be it. But the value in the rules is you have the rules. If you don't know anything about RPGs or this particular game or this particular style of game, you can play by the rules to learn it and to get immersed in it. And the other side of that, the other value of rules is, as you said, getting into the mindset of the creators. How did they play the game? Not just in the specific rules, but how did they think about the game? And I agree with you. I think that's what a lot of people who are kind of, I guess, obsessed, maybe sometimes is a loaded word, but I think it's a good word. There's a comedian that talks about how, whether you're a geek or dork or nerd depends on, what characteristics you have of being socially awkward, being obsessed, and being OCD. Anyway, that's a digression. But the point I guess I'm trying to make is getting in that mindset is interesting because, as many people point out that are interested in that, the way the hobby was played, the wargaming clubs that existed back then, that this grew out of that culture, they don't exist as much anymore, and maybe not at all in certain places. I think they are still a thing, like over in Britain. Maybe one of my listeners from across the pond can tell me if that's the case. I don't think there's as much of that here in the United States as there used to be, but maybe somebody that's from another part of the United States than me can set me straight and say, no, we have a really solid wargaming club group here. But I think that tinkering and adjusting and making do mindset that seemed to be present in the 60s, in the 70s, that D&D grew out of is there. And I think it continued. If you look at where the co-authors of D&D went after they were, removed from TSR, essentially, they went on to create other games with similar concepts, but were different because when they came together, they were different people. They were inspired by each other, but they were not playing the same way. And OD&D was an amalgam of their play style. And then when Gary Gygax wrote AD&D, he kind of moved it more towards what his exact play style. But the games that they built later were not D&D clones by any means. And, we know that Arneson published some version or another of the first fantasy campaign multiple times with multiple companies up even into the 2000s. And Gary Gygax designed two completely different published games, one of which TSR sued over and got the rights to, and even by many accounts was fairly involved in the development of Castles and Crusades. And even, I think, in his articles in Dragon Magazine, Gary indicated the direction his ideas for a second edition would go in. And so, changes were constantly being made. That was the mindset. And so understanding that mindset and understanding that evolution is certainly a goal worth having. And, for that, I understand why a specific rule may be, the development of a specific rule may be of interest. I still don't know that goes into why this specific rule is important to exactly play this way, other than as learning that particular game. But that's just me. I obsess about different things. So thank you for the thought-provoking calls, Daniel. Always appreciate it when you call, and look forward to the next time. On a fairly recent episode of the Nerds RPG Variety Cast, Jason played a call where M.W. Lewis from the World's M.W. Lewis podcast asked a question about what did Jason mean when he talked about procedural games that are procedural RPGs, procedural games. How is that different from what kind of RPGs are not procedural games? And how is that different from playing a board game? Because he talks about how when he plays a board game or RPG, he likes to play by the rules and isn't procedural just meaning that it has rules. And Jason brought in Carl from the GMologist Presents podcast to help him answer the question. And I'm going to link to that episode. I'm also going to link to an episode of Carl's podcast where Carl answers a call also about procedural RPGs that are procedural. Because since the Nerds RPG Variety Cast is ending soon, Jason didn't want callers to try to call into the show because there wouldn't be a show to play the calls. So he encouraged them to call Carl's show. And Carl and Jason spent a lot of time talking about how BX has procedures. They discussed that AD&D has procedures. And they talked about Powered by the Apocalypse games and whether or not they had procedures. And they talked about how the playbooks that they have are actually pretty procedural because the GM calls for taking an action through the use of playbooks. But the discussion got me to thinking about an interesting juxtaposition in the OSR community, I think in particular, or those who advocate an old school style of play. Because there's a lot of reverence for procedures in RPGs, having procedural RPGs that guide play. And a lot of retro clones are based on BX, which is what Carl and Jason were talking about, has very solid procedures for things like combat and exploration and dungeon exploring and things like that. So having that type of play is talked about a lot in OSR and old style circles. But another thing that's talked about a lot in those same circles is rulings over rules. And rulings over rules occurs when you don't try to have a rule for every occasion. You don't have that guidance that procedures give you. And the reason why that's considered important is because it gives the players freedom to essentially not just be programmed to look on your character sheet for the answer, to ask questions about the environment, about the people, about NPCs, about the creatures around you, and come up with ways to solve issues or problems or puzzles that are blocking the players from achieving the goals they want to achieve. And so I think there's an interesting tension between how procedural do you want your RPG to be and still have that freedom that really defines RPGs from any other style of game. How far do you go before you lose that procedural entirely? And does that not just lead to more freedom? Or if you have too much freedom to simply come up with an answer on your own, does that lead to kind of an analysis paralysis situation? Because if you look at a game like Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, there is some procedural guidance there. It's not as point by point as it is in, say, BX, but a lot of it is tied to the character sheet. Looking at your character sheet for answers, looking at your character sheet for that specific skill or that specific feat or that specific spell or that specific character power, that is the procedure. The procedure is the GM presents a obstacle and the players then look to what skill do they have that can overcome that obstacle. So I think the notion of wanting procedures in role-playing games is more of a question of where do you want the procedures? And in the case of 5e style games, the procedures are part of organizing what options do you have, whereas in the older school games, the procedures seem to be more about just what order do you do stuff in, and you have to come up with the options yourself. Whereas in the 5e games, the order you do stuff you have to come up with for yourself. So in something like BX or BECME or AD&D, you move, then attack in combat, whereas in a game like 5e or Pathfinder, you can attack and then move, or you can break up your move between move, attack, move. But I thought that was an interesting contrast between two different things that are considered important in a lot of old school or OSR circles that seem to kind of work against each other. The freedom of the players versus the prescription of following a procedure exactly. And this probably could have just been a call-in to call show, but I'm going on 6 minutes here, so that would have been a pretty long call. So if anybody has anything else they would like to say about procedures, something I've missed, something I haven't talked about, I encourage you, number one, to listen to that episode of the Nerds RPG Variety Cast and the GMologist Presents podcast, which I will have, as I said before, links to in the show notes. But also give me a call or give Carl a call, because I listen to that show and I'll hear it there as well. And with that being said, and now more from my solo AD&D RPG campaign, Tales of the Dragon Slayers. Day 116, the beginning of the Red Dragon's Rampage. Delve number 11, delve back into the upper levels of the hill. The party is Katya, a first level cleric, first level fighter, fourth level magic user. Bernie, an elven first level fighter, first level magic user, first level thief. Sven, a halfling first level fighter. Harl and Quinn, two first level human rangers. And Mikal, a first level human fighter. The party returns to their main entry point into the first upper level of the keep in the hill. They take the long corridor north through the gas that makes most of them feel stronger. At the end, they reach a secret door to the east, which they had spiked closed, which they then open, and proceed into a 30 by 30 foot room with doors to the north and to the east. This room is empty, so they open the door to the east into a narrow 10 foot by 30 foot room. There they surprise 4 giant toads in a flooded space. They're able to kill them quickly and are able to dodge a trapdoor and find jewelry and gold. While they're searching, 2 giant lizards come in. They all strike simultaneously. Bernie is able to kill one and then the other of the lizards. Going back into the other 30 by 30 foot room, they open up the door to the north. Here it opens up into a vast hexagonal space, and the walls and ceiling are covered with star charts. But there is nothing else of consequence in the room. This room has what turns out to be a one-way door to the east, which opens into a long corridor that they had explored in a previous delve. This takes them north, then east, into a 30 by 20 foot room they had explored earlier that had 3 secret doors. 2 of the doors they had opened into small 10 by 10 foot rooms with various laboratory gear and jars full of varied gases. The 3rd secret door to the north they had spiked shut. They then opened it. This opens into a hallway which goes east and west. They can see the west way goes about 30 feet before turning north. They elect to go east, where they also see a corridor going to the north. The corridor also continues on to the east, although it dead ends after 20 feet there. Following the eastern north corridor, they proceed north 50 feet where they come to an odd-shaped room with a 20 by 20 foot section where they enter and a 30 by 30 foot section further to the west. In the 20 by 20 foot section, right to the east of where they came into the chamber, they see a spiral staircase that they see matches up to one they had seen on the level below. They dodge a trap door going around the spiral staircase, and when they enter the 30 by 30 foot section of the room, they see more of the magical looking glasses that they've seen around this dungeon, but which they have not yet tested. They seem to show other places. They suspect they may be some sort of teleporters, but have not checked them out. There's also an exit to the east from this room, which they follow 10 feet into another 30 by 30 foot chamber. Here, a small group of giant ants come in on them. They use the sense provided by the queen to get them to leave to go back to the caves where the queen's lair lies. This chamber has 2 exits to the south, one on the west side of the room, one on the east side of the room, and an exit to the north on the east side of the room. They recognize that the exit to the east side of the room leads south to the east-west corridor where they originally came into this section of the dungeon. So they take the west southern exit into another 30 by 30 foot chamber. But they are warned by one of their intelligent swords that this is an elevator room and do not go in. Taking the north exit, the hallway goes north 30 feet and ends with a door to the west. They open the door into a 40 by 40 foot room where they encounter 4 ghasts. They surprise the ghasts as they seem to be feeding on the back wall, and Katya is able to catch them with a web spell. The party is able to dispatch them without too much trouble and then burn off the webs, revealing chests with copper, electrum, gold, platinum, scrolls, potions, and a magical throwing axe, as well as some jewelry. They also see that the ghasts were feeding on some gnomes. There are 4 additional doors leading out of this room, 3 to the east, 3 to the west, and 1 to the east. They open the one to the east, and there they find 10 gnomes cowering inside who had barely escaped the fate of their fellows. They organize a couple of their troops that are following them to take the gnomes back to their fellows down on the first level of the dungeon. And after narrowly avoiding a block falling from the ceiling, they uncover a chest with silver and gold. Going back to the room that the ghasts had occupied, they open the middle door because each of these doors is only 10 feet apart, so they think that there's a possibility that that door may just be a small room. It is. Bernie hears something inside the room, so they open it cautiously, and they find 3 gnomes. What the party doesn't know is that these are actually doppelgangers. They do not recognize them for that, and they send them back to the gnomes as well. Inside, they discover a huge chest with gold and jewelry, and Bernie has to shake off the effects of poison as he opens the chest. Back in the ghast room, they elect to take the southern door. They open it into a 20 by 20 foot room with a shrieker, which the party kills quickly. And searching the room, they find a secret door to the west, which they spike shut for the time being. They then return to the ghast room to open the door to the north. This opens into a roughly 30 foot by 30 foot semicircular cave with one opening to the north. Sven's trident warns him of a scythe trap, and behind a loose section of stone in the wall, they discover some silver ore. Going through the opening to the north, they come across 2 doppelgangers in their normal form. They overcome them without taking any damage and find that they have a scroll, a ring, a rod, a brooch, 2 gems, 7 pieces of jewelry, and some silver pieces. A search of the room reveals a secret door leading to the west, which opens onto a narrow section of cave that runs roughly southeast to northwest. There's another secret door opposite where they entered this section, and an opening to the northwest. They spike that secret door shut and go through the opening into a roughly 50 by 50 foot cave. As they're searching this section, they encounter a group of 10 gnomes who they send back to their fellows, and then they also find another group of giant ants, which they send to their queen. In a short northern extension of the cave, they find another secret door also going to the east. They go back to the short northwest to southeast section, and they like to go through that secret door first. This opens into another large cave, again roughly 50 feet by 50 feet, but with an extension leading south out of the southeast corner. This dead ends into a stone wall, which they recognize from their map is the outside of the 30 by 20 foot room where they had found the first group of gnomes that had escaped the gas. Here they find some veins of very strange looking ore, but which Katya recognizes as being similar to the makeup of some of the iron stones that she had found, or that they had found earlier in their delves. Returning back to the secret door, they go into the north extension of the last cave section they had found, where they had found the other secret door. They take that one to the east. It follows a winding path roughly 60 feet to the east before turning north and opening into another large cave. This one is roughly 70 feet by 20 feet. A search reveals a concealed door in the northeast corner, and they open it, and it opens up onto a ledge on the outside of the cave overlooking the road, on the outside of the hill overlooking the road. Going back inside, they find another door in the southwest corner, leading roughly southeast. They open it into a narrow cave with a roughly 10 by 20 foot section where they open the door, and then just to the west, a roughly 20 by 20 foot section. This cave is empty, but they do find a secret door leading to the east. Opening this door, the cavern beyond is roughly 30 feet by 60 feet, with a door to the south and an extension out of the southwest corner. They run into yet another group of ants, which they send back to the queen, and under a stone block they find scattered around some copper and gold. Taking the section of the cave that goes to the southwest, it turns south and goes about 50 feet, ending in a section of cave where they find another secret door. They open this one into a vast cave, and realizing that the day is dwindling and they are tired, they close it and spike it and return back to their home base. The opening music of this podcast is Strength of the Titans, and the closing music is Late Night Radio, both by Kevin MacLeod of Incompetech.com, licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 4.0 license. Thank you for listening to Phantom Thoughts. I would love to hear your feedback. You don't have to be part of the show. If you want to contact me and let me know, hey, these are for your eyes only. I just wanted to give you thoughts, ideas, response, and it's really for your eyes or ears only. That's absolutely fine. I'd love to hear from you either way. So just let me know when you contact me. Just, I don't want to be part of the show. There are lots of different ways you can contact me. You can send me an email at phantomthoughtspodcast@gmail.com. And that can be a regular email, or you can attach an audio file to it. You can use the message button on my podcast site on podcasters.spotify.com/pod/show/phantom thoughts. You can contact me via my Google Voice number, 864-209-1441. You can contact me via SpeakPipe at www.speakpipe.com/phantom thoughts. You can contact me on Discord, The Pink Phantom. All this contact information is listed in the show notes of every episode. And thank you for those who call in. Thank you for those who don't call in. I appreciate you listening and hope you'll listen again next time. Until then, I hope you have a great day.